Our next speaker spent his career running manufacturing companies. In the late 1980s, Jack was the managing director of Microdot Aerospace Limited in England. While there, his company had the opportunity to participate in an air show in Beijing, China. Today, Jack will share with us his experience at this air show. Speaking for 5 to 7 minutes, his title is China Experience. Please join me in welcoming Jack Kantola.
So I decided to visit the Friendship Store, which was the only place that, as a Westerner, you could really go and buy things with your currency, which was the yuan. The local currency was the renminbi. And I was in the store, wandering around, looking at all the merchandise, and I saw this lady with this kind of an excited look on her face, and she had a book in her hand. She's looking around for somebody to obviously share something with. So she came over to share with me, and it was a cookbook. And she had it opened to a recipe for deer penis stew. Okay. Deer penis stew. And I'm going, wow, I've never seen that in a recipe book before. I have to have that. I bought the book. And then I sent the recipe to my brothers in Minnesota. They're deer hunters. I said, now you have no excuse to throw away any part of the deer. Madam Toastmaster. China, 1986, 3 years before Tiananmen Square massacre, was still China. It was old, and it was quaint, and it was interesting. The only Western hotels were on the fringe, and we were staying at the hotel at the Great Wall Sheraton. And then we would commute from there to our convention center by bus. And we had an aerospace show that set up, and we were up there for about 5 days at the show. And the first thing we learned was it wasn't like setting up a show in the United States, because they didn't speak English. And so I somehow found out that this one fellow was to be my assistant, a carpenter, whatever he was, and we went through a game of charades setting up the booth. But we ultimately got the thing set up, and we became very close friends. We had a great time together in that period of time. During the show, it didn't take us very long to realize that with the show, in terms of our business, wasn't going to be tremendously productive. But we had with us in the booth a technical explainer who didn't speak English, but could explain things technical. And we had an interpreter who had spent time in the United States, and his English was very good. And so they would help us when we were talking to people from the aerospace industry. But one of the things that happened was during the show, we would see these little groups of people, young people, at least they looked young, in Mao costumes, which were still the order of the day in 1986, gathering and chatting to each other, and then they would look over at our booth from time to time. Then eventually one of them was delegated to come over to the booth and say, hello, how are you? Where are you from? and say they were just trying to practice in their English. And so we got our interpreter to teach us how to say, you look tired, take a break, in Chinese. And so they would come over to the booth and say, hello, how are you? Where are you from? And we'd tell them that we're from the United States. And then in Chinese, we would say, you look tired, take a break. And they would absolutely crack up. We had so much fun doing that. And the show continued. And then during that same period of time, we took the opportunity to do a little touring. I learned some things from the process of touring. Is number one, when you're in a country like China was in 1986, is that if you're going to take a taxi someplace, keep it. People learned they took a taxi to the Great Wall, which at that time you could just drive up to the wall and just climb it. There was no tourist activity there at all. They would just send a taxi home. And then they would stand there going, how do I get back to town? Because you could take a taxi someplace, but you couldn't get a taxi to go back. I went on one of the days that I was there, I decided to take a little tour, and I had Peter, my sales manager, man the booth, and I went to the hotel and got a taxi. thankfully the guy was learning English fairly well. And we drove over to the Temple of Heaven, stopped off at the north side, and he let me out. And he said, I'll pick you up at the south end. And I said, great. And then he takes off, and I'm going, how will I recognize him? My gosh. And so I went into the Temple of Heaven, went through, toured through, and while I was there, a couple came up to me and with a camera suggesting taking a picture. And so I said, yeah, I'll take a picture of you. No, he wanted his lady friend to take a picture of me and him so that he could show his friends his United States friend, his American friend. I walked down to the bottom end of the south end of the Temple of Heaven, and then I quickly realized I didn't worry about it because I didn't have to recognize him, he recognized me. And we went from there to the old town in China. I wandered through the shops and bought a few things. And while I was doing that, I would have conversations with a lady that was from Chicago. And so as I was going back to the hotel, I went back to my taxi. I saw her standing in the corner scratching her head. I said, you're looking for a taxi, aren't you? I said, here, I'll give you a ride. So we gave her a ride back to her place. And then as we closed the booth, as we closed the show on the Friday when it ended, I went back to the convention center, and Peter was there scratching his head trying to figure out how to get our packing cases, because he was having trouble communicating with the people and understanding what they were and what he needed to have. So I walked out to this huge stack of packing cases, and I was able to find and pull out ours without collapsing the whole mountain. I stacked them up, and then when a fork truck driver came by, I used the perfect communication method. You here. He came, picked them up, hauled them in, we were on our way. So China was a wonderful experience in 1986. And some of the things I learned was when you're traveling in foreign countries, especially like China was in 1986, is you have to adjust, adapt, you have to learn. You have to be able to adapt to whatever situation you're in. And we did that, and it worked. And then the second thing is, wherever you're at, whatever you're doing, have fun. And we did. Madam Toastmaster.